Part 29. The Original Vampire. Author, Ludo Busroot. Chapter 283. Boom. The two surging armies finally and inevitably collided. The fierce clash of gold and iron and the tragic howling intertwined in an instant, and bright blood flowers burst into bloom. Many soldiers fell down wailing, in an instant. In a head-on collision without tricks, strength determines everything. The Golden Lions still maintained a rigorous square charge formation. The first row of infantry picked up the strong giant shields in their hands and connected them to form a cold shield wall, blocking the oncoming dwarves from the shield wall. The infantrymen in the second and third rows used their spears to continuously thrust through the gaps reserved in the giant shields and the gaps between the shields, stabbing down the dwarves and blocking the shield wall row by row. Bang! A dwarf soldier was pushed forward by the surging crowd and slammed into the giant shield of the Golden Lion Legion. The sharp spikes covering the surface of the giant shield instantly left more than a dozen huge bloody holes in his body. The dwarf soldier held the giant shield with both hands and roared as he struggled to pull his body out. However, when he lowered his head, he saw more than a dozen blood arrows spurting out of his body. The fear of death instantly enveloped him, and shrill screams continued to come from his mouth. Boom! Another dwarf soldier hit the giant shield hard with a hammer, making a deafening sound. However, it did not damage the giant shield, leaving only a small and innocuous dent in it. Whizzing! Two sharp spears thrust out from the gaps on both sides of the giant shield. With a flash of cold light, they pierced the dwarf soldier's lower abdomen and emerged from his back. Red blood flowed along the spears. The blade slowly dripped. Behind him, a dwarf soldier who was not afraid of death stepped on his companion's shoulders, jumped up hard, and came to the giant shield. He raised the sharp knife in his hand high and slashed at the person hiding behind the giant shield with a wild laugh. Human soldier. However, before the steel knife in his hand fell, a cold spear thrust out like a poisonous snake. Chi! The sharp blade of the gun pierced the chest of the dwarf soldier, pinning him firmly in the air. A long and shrill howl came from the dwarf's mouth, and as the blood spurted out, the young vitality flowed out of his body like a tide. Get away! A dwarf officer rushed to the giant shield and slammed down the long-handled giant hammer in his hand. Boom! Amidst the violent impact, a strong steel shield instantly fell apart, unable to stop the dwarf warrior's hammer blow. The human soldiers hiding behind the giant shield were struck by lightning and were immediately shocked to the point of bleeding from all their orifices. They collapsed limply on the ground and twitched all over. But almost as soon as this man fell to the ground, another human soldier came up with a giant shield, filling the gap just opened by the dwarves, so that the forward formation remained intact. Whoosh whoosh! 3 sharp spears were thrust out from 3 different angles at the same time, and the glinting blades of the spears were pointed directly at the dwarf officer. Clang! The dwarf officer fought back and barely managed to knock away 2 spears, but was unable to stop the last spear from piercing his right arm. As the blood splattered, the dwarf officer roared wildly and smashed the handle of the spear that pierced his arm with a hammer. However, another spear pierced out from the gap in the shield wall and went straight for his head. The dwarf officer felt cold in his heart, so he had no choice but to take a few steps back and hide in the military formation at the rear. However, at this time, the dwarf military formation was gradually beginning to collapse. Whether it is the quality of soldiers or the training equipment, the dwarves cannot compare with the Golden Lion army. Not to mention that they have just experienced a melee last night and are extremely exhausted. At this time, they are no match for the Golden Lion army who are waiting for them. Under the cold-blooded and orderly assassination of the Golden Lion Legion, the dwarf forward troops fell down row by row, and the formation gradually dispersed. However, the formation of the Golden Lion army remained stable. The infantrymen in the front row carried giant shields and began to advance slowly. The spears behind the giant shields were still swallowing like poisonous snakes, continuing to swallow the fresh lives of the dwarf soldiers. In the rear position of the Golden Lion army, Count Anka's face was pale and he was sweating coldly all over his body. Viscount Angelet, Arminum family is willing to negotiate peace, please withdraw your troops immediately. Colin looked at the battle ahead and said without looking back, Count Anka, you can decide when the war will start, but it will when it will end, it may not be under your control. Count Anka's mouth was full of bitterness, and he had to lower his attitude very low and said, Viscount Angelet, you can make whatever conditions you have, as long as the Maynham family can do it, I can agree to it. Colin glanced at the other party and said with a smile, I want you to get out of the north, is that okay? Earl Anka's eyes twitched, and he forced a smile, Viscount Angelet, we may the Nom family have reached territory replacement agreements with many northern lords, wouldn't you be forcing us to renege on these agreements? Colin shrugged, shook his head, and said, then there's no need to talk, keep fighting, let's see if your Maynham family is qualified to establish a foothold in the north. Viscount Angelet, why are you doing this? When two armies fight, there will always be casualties. Can you bear to watch the Golden Lion army suffer heavy losses? Heavy losses? Colin smiled disdainfully. Does your Maynham family have this ability? Earl Anka's face turned red, and his tone became rude, Viscount Angelet, don't you have it? Have you ever heard of the reputation of the heavy armored infantry of the Maynham family? I've heard of it. Besides, I really want to see it with my own eyes. Colin looked unconcerned, but then his eyes narrowed, he smiled and pointed in the direction of the battlefield, hey, the opportunity just came. Earl Anka quickly turned his head and looked forward, and he saw a torrent of red steel protruding from the Maynham family's military formation, rolling towards the front line of the battlefield like lava gushing out. That is the 8,000 heavy armored infantry regiment that the Maynham family is most proud of. Earl Anka took a deep breath, knowing that his father had thrown the family's boss into the battlefield, and it seemed that he was ready to fight to the death. Therefore, he stopped persuading and planned to let Colin see the strength of the Maynham family and let the other party suffer some losses. In this way, perhaps the St. Hilda family would be willing to return to the negotiation table. It has to be said that this dwarf heavy armored infantry regiment is indeed amazing in combat effectiveness. As soon as they joined, the situation on the battlefield suddenly reversed. The giant shield and spear formation of the Golden Lion army seemed to have hit a towering mountain, and its forward momentum was immediately curbed. The sharp spears could not pose a threat to the heavily armored infantry, and they could only be allowed to push back while shouting neat slogans and waving war hammers. Count Anka was excited and couldn't help but put a smug smile on his face. However, when he turned to look at Colin, he could not find any panic on his face. Count Anka thought that Colin was just trying to calm down, and he was disdainful, so he turned his attention to the battlefield again, preparing to wait until the Golden Lion army's front line collapsed completely before he could persuade him again. Presumably, at that time, Colin's attitude would definitely not be the same. As tough as before. However, after Earl Anka observed for a while, he was surprised to find that although the Golden Lion army's military formation was retreating, it was still in order and showed no signs of collapse. As the dwarf heavy armored infantry continued to advance, a distance had unknowingly opened up between them and the rear army formation. At this moment, a distant bugle suddenly sounded from behind the dwarf army. Immediately afterward, there was a faint shout. At this time, the dwarves still didn't know what was going on, but the shouts were getting closer and closer, and at the same time, there was the sound of intensive horse hooves, as if countless giants were beating the earth, and the entire wilderness was followed by shake-up. Count Anka's heart skipped a beat. Looking from a distance, he saw a thin black line appearing on the field behind the Maynham family. This black line grew larger and wider and finally evolved into a black sea that spread towards the battlefield. In this black sea, the black lion flag and the roaring white bear flag of the Angelet family were fluttering in the wind. They surged in like huge waves in a tropical storm and swept over like a flood that broke a bank. Everywhere they went, everything was submerged by this black torrent, which made people feel chilled in their hearts. Black Cavalry. Count Anka's voice changed. He immediately realized that this was a trap specially set by Colin. At this time, the Minim family's most elite heavy armored infantry regiment had become entangled with the Golden Lion Army and was completely separated from the Chinese army in the rear. The Black Cavalry Army seized such an excellent opportunity and suddenly attacked from the rear, like a dragon emerging from the water, and rushed straight into the heart of the Minim family. It's over. Although the Black Cavalry has not yet arrived, Count Anka has already foreseen what will happen next. And this kind of foresight made him feel as if he had fallen into an ice cave. So, he no longer dared to hesitate and immediately turned to Colin and begged for mercy. Viscount Angelet. We admit defeat. As long as you are willing to cease the war, our Minim family will immediately withdraw from the north, and the establishment of the dwarf nation will never be done. Bring it up again. Colin chuckled and said coldly. I have said before that you can decide when this war will start, but when it will end, you have to ask my opinion. Then what is your opinion? Really? Colin stopped answering, and a bloodthirsty smile appeared on his lips. Boom. In an instant, the Black Cavalry Army rushed into the rear of the Minim family like a violent wave. Blood splattered everywhere, and corpses flew everywhere. The Original Vampire. Author, Lugo Busroot. Chapter 284. Wells and the officers of the Dawson family watched helplessly as the wolf-like Black Cavalry rushed the Mainham family's central army position to pieces, and they couldn't help but feel a sense of sadness in their hearts. A feeling of, the Mainham family is finished. This is the only thing they agree on. Even on the frontal battlefield, the Golden Lion Corps was actually at a disadvantage and was forced to retreat step by the heavily armored infantry regiment. However, when the Black Cavalry suddenly came out from behind and cut off the commander's flag, the Minim family's elite former army inevitably fell into chaos. Even if the former army wanted to retreat, it would be too late, and the Golden Lion Army would not let them go easily at this time. What's more, once the Central Army's rear army collapses, the Minim family's army will become a headless snake. They cannot be commanded and dispatched in a unified manner. They can only fight independently, and they will only be defeated individually. Master, are we going to provide support? An officer from the Dawson family asked Wells. Wells resisted the urge to curse and glared at the person who asked the question but did not answer. Support, asshole. The Dawson family had just fought to the death with the Mainham family. How could they go to support them now? What's more, there is the Uman family watching eagerly from the side. Wells is almost certain that as long as they dare to act rashly, the Uman family will definitely attack in a big way. Seeing the miserable situation of the Mainham family, Wells did not want the Dawson family to make the same mistakes as the other party. We'd better withdraw our troops. Wells suggested it hesitantly. But this bastard suggestion made all the Dawson family officers lower their heads. The crowd's reaction immediately made Wells realize that he had said something stupid. What is the use of withdrawing troops at this time? Let's not talk about whether it can be evacuated. Even if it is evacuated, what is the use? When the St. Hilda family calms down the chaos in the north, won't they be free to deal with the Dawson family? At this time, all the officers were extremely looking forward to the safe return of Marquis Dawson. Even if the Marquis was not there, it would be better to have Count Falco here, which would be better than letting the inconsistent Wells come up with random ideas. I think it's better to seek peace from the St. Hilda family, an officer suggested in a muffled voice. Yes, yes. We should continue the peace talks. Continue the peace talks, Wells shouted as if grabbing a life-saving straw. But before Wells could send out the peace envoy, the envoy from Winter City arrived at the Dawson family position. However, the messenger was wearing a priest's robe. While the officers were in shock, Wells was overjoyed. He held the priest's hand and asked eagerly, "Did the Archbishop send you here?" The priest nodded with a smile and then took out his hand without leaving a trace. "Come." Praise the Lord of Glory. Wells was so excited that there was a hint of crying in his voice. "I knew the Archbishop would not give up on her most devout believer. Your Excellency, the Archbishop, is willing to help the Dawson family, and the St. Hilda family has reached a settlement, but she also needs you to show some sincerity, otherwise, she will not be able to speak for you." "What sincerity?" "As long as our Dawson family can do it, you can just ask." "It's actually very simple," the priest said with a smile. "The Menem family has invaded the Northern Territory brazenly and has been listed as a must-kill enemy by the St. Hilda family. If you can lead an army to help attack the Menem family, then the St. Hilda family will also they will consider forgiving the Dawson family for their previous betrayal." Wells hesitated for a moment. It's not that he doesn't want to attack the Menem family. After all, the two families have been at odds before and even had a fight last night. However, Marquis Dawson is still in the opponent's hands, and Wells is worried that his attack will make the Mainham family choose to jump over the wall and kill his father. After expressing this doubt, the priest smiled mysteriously, approached Wells, and whispered, "Sir Wells, do you want to inherit the title of the Dawson family?" Wells's eyes narrowed, and his heart skipped a beat. After a few beats, he asked evasively, "What do you mean?" "The Archbishop asked me to tell you that she can help you get rid of Count Falco. As for your father, Marquis Dawson, haha, with all due respect, given his previous betrayal of Marquis Garcia, the St. Hilda family will never let him go. Therefore, even if he can survive the Menem family, he will never escape from the St. Hilda family." Family trial. So, are you really willing to let the Dawson family be implicated with him? Wells' heart was pounding. He wanted to know what happened to his brother, Count Falco. But when the words came to his lips, he didn't dare to ask. After pondering for a long time, he finally raised his head again, with a hint of ambition in his eyes. "Okay, I am willing to follow the Archbishop's advice. I also hope that the Archbishop can help the Dawson family get a decent ending." The mage smiled. He nodded and said, "Of course, the Archbishop will never give up on his devout believers." After receiving the Archbishop's promise, Wells suddenly felt that he had a backer. After sweeping away his previous decadent and confused state, he immediately reorganized his army and began to march toward the left wing of the Menem family's position. At this time, the Menem family's military formation was on the verge of collapse. The Golden Lion army had already pressed forward again from the front, and the Black Cavalry army came from behind, galloping across the field, constantly dividing and strangulating the Menem family's middle and rear troops, making it impossible for them to regroup. The addition of the Dawson family immediately became the straw that broke the camel's back. Facing the cruel reality, more and more Menem family soldiers dropped their weapons and chose to surrender. Of course, there is no shortage of brave warriors in the Menem family who are not afraid of death, but their stubborn resistance is like moths fluttering into the flames in the face of Huang's general trend. It has no other use except adding some heroism and sadness. The Marquis of Mainham knew from the moment the Black Cavalry army appeared that this battle was going to be a disaster, and when the Dawson family's army also turned against them, he fell into complete despair. The furious Marquis of Mainham immediately drew the sword from his waist, turned around, and stabbed the Marquis of Dawson. Marquis Dawson not only did not dodge when facing the stabbing sword but also showed a look of relief on his face. "Chi!" The long sword passed through his chest. Marquis Dawson looked at the fellow dwarf in front of him with a sarcastic sneer on his lips and hissed, "I'm in heaven, waiting for you." This attitude made the already angry man, the Marquis of Mainham, fall completely into madness. He roared and chopped off the head of the Marquis of Dawson, and then chopped his body into 7 or 8 pieces before stopping. Then, Marquis Menham held up his bloody head and ordered, "Hand out the white flag and surrender." The afternoon sun was very fierce, shining on the land stained red with blood. Groups of vultures are flying and circling in the sky, ready to swoop down for a meal. "Father!" When the Marquis of Menham was escorted to Colin, Count Anka immediately pounced on him. Marquis Menham's eyes were empty, and he ignored his running son. He just knelt down in front of Vera and Colin in a daze, placed Marquis Dawson's head in front of him, and then waited quietly without saying a word. "On trial?" Vera turned to look at Colin, obviously not knowing how to deal with Marquis Menham. Colin was not polite and immediately stepped forward and pronounced, "Marquis Menham, you and your family are not welcome in the north. Therefore, after this battle, please return to the Scarlet Flame territory immediately, unless you get the help of the St. Hilda family. Otherwise, you will never be allowed to set foot in the north again. In order to compensate for the harm your actions have caused to the people of the north, all your family troops will stay in the north as slaves, working for the north until death. At the same time, the Menham family needs to pay the St. Hilda family a total of 8 million gold coins in war compensation, which should be paid back in 5 years. Are you willing to accept these conditions?" Marquis Menham's heart was bleeding, but he knew that he no longer had any money. There is no room for bargaining. If it were before this battle, he might have been able to strive for an outcome in which the entire army would withdraw from the north, but now, it would be good to save the lives of the Menham family members. Of course, he also knew that Colin did not kill him just to save face for the royal family. The Menham family, which has lost all its troops and is burdened with heavy debts, naturally cannot become a threat to the St. Hilda family. As time goes by, I am afraid that it will slowly sink and never be the same again. Of glory? And the dream of the dwarves to establish a nation will also become an unattainable luxury. Thinking of this, Marquis Menham couldn't help but feel sad and choked with sobs. I am willing to accept it." At this time, Colin showed a satisfied smile. Not far away, Wells Dawson, accompanied by a priest, also came to Colin. When Wells saw his father's head, his eyes shrank slightly, but the expression on his face was strange. There is sadness and fear, but also celebration and hidden joy. "Dear Miss Vera, respected Viscount Angelet. Your most loyal servants, the Dawson family, beg for your forgiveness." He looked at the prostrate Wells and then at the priest next to Wells. Colin chuckled, seeming to understand something. Colin rubbed his chin and smiled at Wells. "Wells, your attitude of begging for forgiveness seems not sincere enough." Upon hearing this, Wells immediately nodded understandingly and then crawled to Vera on his hands and knees. In front of her, he kissed her toes and said loudly, "Dear Miss Vera, the Dawson family begs your forgiveness." Colin looked at the second son of the Dawson family, who had no dignity, smiled disdainfully, and then nodded towards Vera. Vera nodded coldly and accepted the other party's apology. Wells was relieved and kept praising the kindness of the St. Hilda family loudly. His posture was so ugly that it was simply unsightly. Colin watched the clown's performance with a smile and began to think about how to deal with the Dawson family. Of course, he wouldn't let him go so easily, but looking at Wells's appearance, the Dawson family must not be able to make any waves. At this point, the rebellion in the north finally came to an end. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Original Vampire. Author, Lugo Busroot. Chapter 285. Merciful Lord of Glory, today we are here to offer prayers for Duke Ceres St. Hilda. He has completed his journey on earth and finally returned to the arms of our Lord, the quiet and solemn tomb. The pious voice of Archbishop Ajani echoed in the cellar. The morning sun shines through the glazed dome, casting colorful light into the tomb. This is one of the most sacred places in Roar Castle, where the remains of the Dukes of St. Hilda are buried. Today, a new member will be welcomed here. In fact, the funeral of Duke St. Hilda was held a little hastily. The North has just calmed down from the turmoil. The new Duke of the North has not yet officially inherited the title, and the nobles and commoners have not yet been appeased. However, Colin immediately requested that Archbishop Ajani preside over the funeral of Duke St. Hilda. After all, if the body of the Duke is not buried, Colin will feel uneasy every day, always feeling that something may happen, which will once again destabilize the situation that has finally been stabilized. Moreover, Colin is also planning to take this opportunity to summon the major lords in the north to come to Winter City to let them know that the Duke named Vera as the first heir in his will. Of course, in order for Vera to officially become the Duke of the North, she still needs to be canonized by Emperor Reinhard. However, now that she has Duke St. Hilda's will, Vera already has a decisive advantage. What's more, Bachelor Dawn already had a plan to deal with Emperor Reinhard and the Senate. Comet from the dust, return to the dust. May your soul rest in peace in the house of the Lord. As Ajani finished reciting her prayer, 4 knights of the St. Hilda family came forward and took the Duke's coffin. He slowly lifted it up and walked toward the center of the tomb. Because he was a paladin during his lifetime, Duke St. Hilda was qualified to be buried in the group of niches in the center of the tomb. After the coffin was slowly pushed into the tomb, Vera and Joyce stepped forward one after another and sprinkled a handful of soil on it. At this point, the funeral came to an end. Colin was relieved. Although there was a tacit understanding with Archbishop Ajani in advance, Colin could only confirm that she would not break her promise until the other party had completely presided over the funeral. Of course, Ajani's cooperation is conditional. Her condition is that the St. Hilda family will no longer pursue the Dawson family for their betrayal. Colin could also guess what the other party wanted to do. Marquis Dawson died, and the Marquis' eldest son, Count Falco, was actually found trying to blaspheme Archbishop Ajani and was arrested by the church. In Colin's opinion, this was obviously a frame-up. No matter how impatient Count Falco was, he would never try to violate Ajani in the church. Ajani's purpose should be to let Wells inherit the title of the Dawson family. This Wells is obviously a fanatical believer in Ajani and a super licker. In this way, Ajani also controls the Dawson family in disguise. Of course, Colin was unhappy with this act of poaching the northern border, but because he now needed to cooperate with the church, he had no choice but to hold his nose and tolerate Ajani's little actions. In fact, forgiving the Dawson family now would do more good than harm for the St. Hilda family. Because what the northern border needs most right now is stability. This storm of rebellion set off by the St. Thean family has a wide range of implications. Some people directly participated in the rebellion, some remained neutral and tried to take advantage of others, and some had ulterior motives in colluding with outsiders. In short, what the northern nobles are most worried about now is whether the St. Hilda family will be liquidated afterward. Forgiving the Dawson family can just dispel everyone's concerns. Even the Dawson family, which directly participated in the rebellion, has been forgiven. Will the St. Hilda family continue to pursue the faults of other families? Of course, in Colin's view, this is just a temporary measure. The North is now too weak and cannot withstand another turmoil, so he is not prepared to start another war. However, after a period of recuperation and when the Northern Territory regained its composure, he would definitely clean up the Northern Territory. For example, the Dawson family, such as the Morrison family. Thinking of this, Colin found Count Morrison among the people who came to watch the ceremony. The young Count's expression was as usual, and there was nothing unusual about him other than the sadness he deserved. But Colin knew that the theft of the Duke's body was probably caused by this family. Originally, Colin had prepared a plan to deal with the other party's sudden attack at the funeral, but unexpectedly, Count Morrison did nothing. How is this going? So what do they want to do with the body of Duke St. Hilda? Colin had no choice but to suppress his doubts in his heart, holding Vera's hand, and they walked out of the tomb together. Behind him, a group of northern nobles also came out. "Miss Vera." Vera stopped and saw Count Morrison chasing after her. "Viscount Angelet." Count Morrison nodded to Colin again. Colin smiled and said nothing, constantly guessing what the other party wanted to do. "Count Morrison, what's the matter?" Vera asked softly. "That's it," Earl Morrison seemed a little embarrassed. "I have admired Miss Nina for a long time, so, I want to ask Miss Vera to marry her to me." Sure enough. Colin's heart moved. Earl Morrison really came to propose marriage. But he was probably too anxious. Duke St. Hilda had just been buried, so he turned around and proposed a marriage request, which was a bit too rash. Moreover, Vera has not yet officially inherited the title of Duke. Strictly speaking, she is not qualified to marry Nina to Earl Morrison. "Sorry, Count Morrison." Vera frowned and said, "I am not the owner of Lion's Roar Castle yet, so I cannot influence cousin Nina's marriage." Count Morrison apologized quickly and said, "Of course I understood, so, I am just expressing my feelings to you this time. After you inherit the position of Duke, it will not be too late to arrange a marriage." "Okay, I will consider it and seek cousin Nina's opinion." Waylaw did not agree directly. But Earl Morrison didn't know whether he misunderstood Vera's meaning or whether he was very confident in himself. He thanked her repeatedly and left with satisfaction. "Colin, do you think I should marry my cousin Nina to Earl Morrison?" Vera asked hesitantly. "You can ask Nina for her opinion first." Colin smiled. "Besides, there's no rush for this. It won't be too late to wait until you officially inherit the position of Duke." "Okay." Vera nodded. "Then when will we set off to Yulong City?" Vera officially inherited the position of Duke and needed to go to Yulong City to accept the Emperor's canonization. Colin mused, "After I complete the prisoner exchange with the Eastern Territory and bring back Marquis Garcia, let's go to Yulong City. Otherwise, there will be no reliable person in the Northern Territory, and I won't worry." Vera's eyes. As soon as he lit up, he said in surprise, "Have you made an appointment with the Eastern Territory for the time and place for the prisoner exchange? Can I go with you?" "The appointment was made 3 months ago. I thought it would be postponed again, but I didn't expect it. The time is just right." Colin patted Vera's little hand. He knew that she missed her father, but he still shook his head and said, "If I want to exchange prisoners, I can go by myself. You need to stay in Winter City now. The northern border has just been decided. A person who can make decisions can stabilize the situation." Vera was immediately disappointed and, at the same time, a little scared. Can I stabilize the situation by myself?" Colin encouraged with a smile, "Be kind to yourself." "Confidence, you are a Saint Hilda and the first heir personally appointed by the previous Duke. Of course, there is no problem. What's more, there is also a Bachelor d'On here. If you have any political issues, you can discuss them with him. As for the military, you can absolutely trust Knight Charles and Viscount Vala." Vera nodded and said with some confusion, "Where is Knight Nelson? Can't he be completely trusted?" "Of course Knight Nelson can also be trusted. I just said, if the worst happens, the only people you can trust with your life are the Knight of Charles and Viscount Vala." Of course, Colin could not tell Vera that Knight of Charles and Viscount Walro were his blood descendants and did not exist the possibility of betrayal, as for other people. "Well, it's hard to say." Vera nodded, indicating that she had taken note of it. "Don't worry, I'll be back soon." "Well, be careful along the way." End of chapter. The Original Vampire. Author, Lugo Busroot. Chapter 286. Alfalfa City is located at the southernmost point of the half-elf kingdom. The Crystal River and the Nushui River intersect here, forming a Y shape that cuts the city into 3 areas. It looks like clover grass, so it is called Alfalfa City. It goes without saying that the geographical location of Alfalfa City is important, but strangely, This city is a typical no-matter area. In fact, if you think about it carefully, it is not difficult to understand why such a situation occurs. It is precisely because its geographical location is so important that although the northern and eastern territories wanted to bring it under their control, they were worried about irritating each other, so they tacitly agreed to throw it to the half-elf kingdom as a neutral. No one should touch the buffer area. For the half-elf kingdom, this is also a hot potato, and they dare not take care of it at all. In this way, Alfalfa City seems particularly embarrassed. There were no lords, no city guards, and no order. This place has gradually become a paradise for adventurers, a gathering place for refugees, and a carnival for anarchists. Strength has become the only pass in Alfalfa City. However, Alfalfa City suddenly became quiet today. Even some of the powerful bosses of one party hunkered down obediently and sternly warned their subordinates not to cause trouble in the past few days. Because, several armies suddenly stationed themselves in the city, including even the famous Black Cavalry Army. Although there are many lawless robbers and murderers in Alfalfa City, they are at most like cockroaches and mice in the shadows. When you see real lions and tigers, you still have to be careful to hide them, otherwise, they are very likely to be wiped out easily. The most majestic building in the north of the city is undoubtedly the glorious church. In such a chaotic city, the Glory Church is one of the few places of peace. Don't think that evil people don't have faith. In fact, it's just the opposite. People who lick blood every day and don't know when they will die on the street need more spiritual sustenance to prevent themselves from going crazy. When Colin walked into the main hall of the church, he saw the figure that had always been on his mind, Queen Elsa. The Queen was standing in front of the statue of the Lord of Glory, bowing her head and closing her eyes, praying devoutly. Quickening his pace slightly, Colin came to Queen Elsa. After not seeing each other for half a year, Queen Elsa's belly has become more obvious. The vague maternal radiance radiates from her body, and coupled with the noble and elegant Queen's temperament, it looks even more alluring. Aware of Colin's arrival, Queen Elsa ended her prayer, turned her head, showed a charming smile, and said, "I thought you would arrive later. Knowing that you are waiting for me, of course, I will travel day and night. What's more, don't underestimate the marching speed of the Black Cavalry." Colin smiled and stepped forward to carefully hug Queen Elsa into his arms, then captured the beautiful red lips and tasted the long-lost fragrance. After some tenderness, Queen Elsa leaned on Colin's chest and asked in a lazy tone, "The time you agreed with the Eastern Territory is 3 days later, right?" "Yes, I have sent an envoy to the river. Across the way, discuss the prisoner exchange." Colin put one hand around Queen Elsa's waist and stroked her swollen belly with the other, but soon he began to climb up dishonestly. Queen Elsa snorted, grabbed Colin's mischievous hand, and shouted, "This is the church." Colin looked down at the snow-white ravine that attracted people's imagination, and his heart was ready to move, but he had to calm down and said, "Is there no problem with food production in the half-elf kingdom this year? This round of unrest has delayed the spring plowing in the north. It is estimated that the famine will continue or even worsen. Therefore, I need your help." "No problem," Queen Elsa said confidently. "At the beginning of the year, I issued a special order to encourage farmers to increase the intensity of spring plowing and land reclamation. Not surprisingly, there will be a bumper harvest this autumn." "Then. Good," Colin breathed a sigh of relief. "As long as we survive this year, the North will be able to relax and everything will slowly get back on track. However, when you send people to buy food this fall, it's best to bring the army." A sharp look flashed in Queen Elsa's eyes. "What's wrong? Someone is dishonest." "Well, at the end of last year, your behavior of forcibly purchasing a large amount of food from Silvermoon City at a low price to rescue the northern border has made many half-elf merchants and nobles dissatisfied. If it happens again this year, I'm afraid some people will overestimate their capabilities and do stupid things." Colin narrowed his eyes, and his tone became solemn. I know that after returning this time, I will let Duke Medivh lead the Silver Moon Guards back to the half-elf kingdom, help you suppress the domestic situation. Queen Elsa shook her head slightly and said, there is no rush, I can still stabilize the situation in the half-elf kingdom, so the Silver Moon Guards should stay in the north for now. You need them more after the autumn harvest. It will not be too late for Duke Medivh to come back. Although Colin was still a little worried, he did not want to reject Queen Elsa's kindness, nor did he want the other party to think that he doubted her ability to control the domestic situation. Okay. If the situation in Silvermoon City changes, please contact me immediately. Yes. After a moment of silence, Queen Elsa spoke again. The situation in Alfalfa City has been somewhat unusual recently. Colin didn't pay attention and smiled casually. The regular army has entered the city, of course. Those cockroaches and mice in the shadows are hiding. No, that's not what I meant. Queen Elsa's tone became solemn. Since the beginning of the year, a force called the Alfalfa Brotherhood suddenly emerged in the city, sweeping away all the major gangs in the city at an extremely fast speed, has initially taken control of Alfalfa City. Oh, Colin then became serious. Do you know who the leader of the Alfalfa Brotherhood is? It's a 5th-level warrior named Capone. The Lord's recruitment order was wanted by the Eastern Territory, and he fled to Alfalfa City. Although he was outstanding in martial arts, he did not get along well in Alfalfa City, a place where dragons and snakes were mixed. Until the beginning of this year, he suddenly began to form his own force, and it expanded at an extremely fast speed, and now he has almost become the nominal master of the city. Is there someone behind him supporting him? Colin guessed. I think so too, and I suspect that the East Territory is supporting Capone and the Alfalfa Brotherhood. The East Territory, haha, it seems they are not honest either. Colin's eyes became dangerous. Yes. However, you don't have to worry too much. After you annihilated the Pegasus Legion in Silver Moon City, the St. Pros family lost one of their most elite troops directly under their control. They will definitely not be able to invade the north in a short time. Trying to control Alfalfa City with such unflattering means is also worried that the Northern Territory will establish a navy in Silver Moon City in the future and go south along the Crystal River. Colin thought for a moment and said solemnly, Alfalfa City cannot be allowed to fall into the Eastern Territory, it is under control. Queen Elsa raised her head, looked at Colin, and said, it wouldn't be good to have a conflict with the Eastern Territory at this time, right? Colin shook his head and said, don't worry, since the Eastern Territory has chosen to use this, aren't they using unforeseen means to seize Alfalfa City because they are also worried about a direct conflict with the Northern Territory? Therefore, it can be seen from this that the Eastern Territory is actually equally weak. Then what are you going to do? Take advantage of the darkness. The cavalry is in the city, directly destroying the Alfalfa Brotherhood. Colin rubbed Queen Elsa's soft belly and said in a deep voice, no, it's better not to use military force to intervene directly. I'm also worried about pushing the Eastern Territory. If they do, it would not be good to start another war in Alfalfa City. Well, Alfalfa City is under the rule of the half-elf kingdom after all. You will appoint an Alfalfa City Lord in the name of the half-elf queen. Let him know that the United City is unwilling to succumb to the power of the Alfalfa Brotherhood and fight against it. In short, just don't let Alfalfa City completely fall under the control of the Eastern Territory. When the Northern Territory calms down in the future, there will be an excuse to intervene. Aisha the Queen thought for a while and nodded. Okay, I will go find a suitable candidate. Well, if the city lord fails and is killed by Capone, you can continue to appoint a new city lord but never send regular troops into Alfalfa City. Just let the wolves in the city bite each other and make it impossible for the Alfalfa Brotherhood to easily unite the forces in the city. I understand. There are many lawless and vicious people in Alfalfa City. Give Ka. It's not difficult for Peng to find an opponent, and it's even easier to cause chaos here. Seeing that Queen Elsa could understand his intentions so quickly, Colin approvingly kissed her smooth forehead. Queen Elsa's lips were full of joy, and she suggested with a smile, "There is a hot spring behind the church, do you want to take a dip?" "Okay." Of course, Colin would not refuse and immediately picked up Queen Elsa. Amidst the other party's exclamations, he strode outside. End of chapter. The Original Vampire. Author, Lugo Busroot. Chapter 287. The soft afternoon sun shines warmly on people. The boat floating on the Nushui River rippled gently with the waves, like a cradle, making the people on board drowsy. Colin stood up and stretched as if trying to ward off the surge of sleep. There was still some distance from the center of the river for the prisoner exchange, so Colin simply struck up a conversation with Marquis Vincent next to him. "Marquis Vincent, are you still used to staying in Ice Rock City in the past 6 months?" Marquis Vincent snorted lightly and ignored Colin. Half a year of being a prisoner made the once high-spirited Marquis of the East Territory much more haggard. However, Colin did not abuse the other party, he was not that boring yet. In addition to having no personal freedom in Ice Rock City, Marquis Vincent was provided with good food and drink and even found some skilled women to help him solve his physical needs every week. At first, Marquis Vincent felt that Colin was insulting him. How could he, the majestic Marquis of the East, the legitimate son of the noble paladin family, touch those lowly women? But it didn't take long for the noble Marquis of the East to be controlled by his own raging desires and succumb to the pomegranate skirts of those skilled women. A profound interpretation of what it means to say no with your mouth, but your body is very honest. However, although his physical needs were met, the mental humiliation made Marquis Vincent lose weight day by day, and he was looking forward to escaping from the hellish place of Ice Rock City all the time. Now, the light finally appears. Marquis Vincent never wanted to see Colin's disgusting face again. Faced with the undisguised disgust of Marquis Vincent, Colin was not angry and continued to chat with a smile. "I heard that after you were captured, the Duke of St. President considered setting up your brother, Count Evan, as the first heir." Impossible. After hearing this, Marquis Vincent finally spoke. What Colin said was his biggest nightmare after being captured. Seeing that the other party finally responded, Colin continued with a smile, "I met Count Evan once. He is a smart man. If I were the Duke of St. President, I would also consider changing the heir." Marquis Vincent was so angry that he gritted his teeth, stared at Colin with undisguised hatred, and cursed, "If I were your father, I would strangle you to death in your infancy." Haha, his defense was broken. Colin shook his head and said, "Marquis Vincent, you have lost your composure." Marquis Vincent snorted and turned away as if he did not intend to talk to Colin anymore. However, Colin spoke again, "To be honest, I don't like your brother very much. When he was in Silver Moon City, he was making trouble, and now he has extended his hand into Alfalfa City. Haha, what an annoying guy." Yes, after several days of investigation, Colin already knew that the supporter behind the Alfalfa Brotherhood was none other than Count Evan. After hearing this, Marquis Vincent's expression finally softened, and he seemed to feel that Colin and he finally had something in common, so he said coldly, "What exactly do you want to say?" Colin returned to Marquis Vincent. Sitting down across from him, he said with a smile, "I don't want to see your brother become the Marquis of the East either at this point. Our interests are the same, so why not cooperate?" Marquis Vincent sneered with disdain. He said, "Cooperation, haha, have you forgotten the deep hatred between us and actually want to cooperate with me?" Colin shrugged and said innocently, "We made our grudges on the battlefield, but after all, it is when the two armies confront each other that there is an open and honest confrontation. There is no personal grudge between you and me. But your brother always uses some insidious tricks, which is really annoying and is simply an insult to the dignity of a nobleman." Marquis Vincent's face softened a little, and he stared at Colin for a long time and said, my brother is indeed annoying, but if you want to stir up conflicts between us and plunge the Eastern Territory into civil strife, haha, I advise you not to waste your efforts now. Colin still had the same smiling expression. He didn't seem to be discouraged because the other party saw through the scheme. Instead, he patted Marquis Vincent's shoulder gently and said in a friendly tone, "Don't refuse in such a hurry. I really don't want to see a cunning guy who always causes trouble for me inherit the position of Duke of the East. So, think about it again. If you need anything in the future, you can contact me at any time. You should also know my current identity. Vera is about to inherit the position of Duke of the North, and I am her husband. Don't you want to have strong foreign aid?" Marquis Vincent lowered his head and remained silent. I don't know if he was persuaded. Colin continued, "Whether you believe it or not, I am a peace-loving person, and Vera is not an ambitious person. Of course, we prefer a neighbor who is also peace-loving." Marquis Vincent seems to have finally felt moved. He whispered, "I don't want to be an enemy of the North either." Colin smiled slightly, knowing that the other party had been persuaded by him. However, he did not continue to persuade. Too much is not enough. When Marquis Vincent's position in the East was really seriously threatened by his younger brother, he would naturally think of someone who had offered him an olive branch on the Nushui River today. By then, Just as the two were thinking about their own thoughts, the boat slowly arrived in the middle of the Nushui River. There, a gorgeously decorated flower boat had parked. The familiar fragrance of blood roses filled the air, and it was obviously Queen Elsa's ship. As the nominal ruler of Alfalfa City, Queen Elsa is the host of this prisoner exchange ceremony. At the same time as Colin arrived, another small boat from the other side of the river was slowly approaching the flower boat. Boom! The gangway was lowered, and Colin and Marquis Vincent boarded the flower boat one after another. As soon as he stood firm on the deck, Colin saw Count Evan and Marquis Garcia climbing up on the other side. After not seeing him for a long time, Marquis Garcia turned out to have a head full of white hair and was using a cane. Apparently, the tragic defeat left his body with injuries that were difficult to recover from. Although his eyes were still sharp, they no longer had the invincible aura that he had before. Colin sighed secretly in his heart and then stepped forward to say hello. Marquis Garcia looked calm as he greeted Colin and even nodded to his enemy, Marquis Vincent, as if he had forgotten everything in the past. Marquis Vincent was also stunned. Apparently, he did not expect Marquis Garcia to treat him so kindly. In comparison, the relationship between him and his brother, Earl Evan, was somewhat tense. Queen Elsa Shiren walked up to the crowd and said with a smile, "The Lord once said that all hatred, resentment, and malice should be eliminated from your hearts. You can only treat each other with kindness, compassion, and forgiveness. Only then can we be saved." As she said this, she asked the maid to bring 5 glasses of wine and handed them to everyone. When everyone picked up the wine glasses, Queen Elsa continued, "Let us drink this cup together in order to forgive each other and for the Lord's salvation." Colin and others also raised their glasses and drank it all. The atmosphere relaxed a little. Earl Evan looked at Colin and said with a smile, "Viscount Angelet, I'm so happy to hear that the chaos in the north has been resolved." Colin also responded with a smile, "Thank you for your trouble. After all, evil can't be defeated. Defeat justice." Earl Evan nodded solemnly and said in an infinitely sincere tone, "You are right. The St. Zion family has forgotten its mission and glory and even committed the evil act of sacrificing a city. It's really an unforgivable crime. If Prince Leahy hadn't already killed Mr. Jin, our St. Pros family would definitely have sent people to assist the St. Hilda family in getting rid of this extremely evil mage." Colin smiled politely, not speaking. Of course, he would not take the other party's hindsight remarks seriously. Earl Evan's eyes moved slightly and continued, "Although Mr. Jin has received the trial he deserves, as far as I know, there are still fish that have slipped through the net." Hearing this, Colin became somewhat interested. asked, "Oh, I wonder who are the remnants of the St. Zion family, where are they hiding now? That Mr. Jin's whereabouts are secretive. It is indeed very difficult to completely figure out who is left in the St. Zion family, but, I do know the whereabouts of one of his sons." "Where is it?" Earl Evan pointed to the shore and said, "It's in Alfalfa City." Colin narrowed his eyes and asked, "What's his name?" Earl Evan spread his hands and said, "I didn't find out about this either." Colin sneered in his heart, obviously not believing this kind of nonsense. It seemed that Earl Evan didn't want to talk anymore. However, Colin did not intend to ask further questions. Once Mr. Jin died, the St. Zion family no longer had anything to fear from Colin's point of view. What threat could a family without its own territory or a direct army pose? Earl Evan turned to look at Queen Elsa again and said with a smile, "Your Majesty, I heard that you have recently found a lord of Alfalfa City." Yes, Queen Elsa nodded lightly. With a mysterious smile on his face, Earl Evan said to Colin, "Viscount Angelet, if you want to find this remnant of the St. Zion family, shouldn't you seek help from the Lord of Alfalfa City?" Colin nodded lightly. "I will." But Earl Evan's unintelligible smile made Colin unable to help but start thinking wildly, maybe the city lord Queen Elsa just found is a remnant of the St. Thean family. "Then I wish you good luck." Earl Evan then left the flower boat with Marquis Vincent one after another. Colin glanced at Marquis Garcia and asked respectfully, "Mr. Marquis, shall we go back too?" Yes, Marquis Garcia nodded and stared at the water, seemingly without any interest in talking. Colin winked at Queen Elsa, and then the flower boat began to slowly turn around and sail towards the shore. End of chapter. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Original Vampire. Author, Lugo Busroot. Chapter 288. The flower boat slowly sailed towards the shore. Marquis Garcia's eyes were deep, and he had already seen the figure of the cavalry on the shore. Although Marquis Garcia's face remained as calm as before, Colin on the side could still see the unrest in his heart from the opponent's clenched fists. In order to ease the current dull and embarrassing atmosphere, Colin took the initiative to talk about the changes that the Northern Territory had experienced in the past 6 months. Marquis Garcia listened silently without any reaction. It wasn't until Colin finished speaking that he commented lightly, "You did a good job." Colin couldn't help but puff up his chest as if he were a student who was praised by the teacher, and he was excited. But then, Marquis Garcia's next words made him fall out of the clouds. "Is it your child that Her Majesty is carrying in her belly?" Colin immediately stiffened, feeling as if he had been caught and raped by his father-in-law. For a moment, I didn't know whether to lie or admit it honestly. Fortunately, Queen Elsa said softly, "Your Excellency, the child in my belly is the Miller family's child." Marquis Garcia understood what the Queen meant. This child would not become Colin's public heir, and she would also never threaten Vera's status. Therefore, Marquis Garcia once again set his sights on the other side and stopped talking. Colin was relieved. However, he also realized that in this world's culture, the existence of noble lovers is very tolerant. Most nobles have lovers and illegitimate children. Of course, the premise is that she will not threaten the status of the head wife. Otherwise, Marquis Garcia will not let Queen Elsa go easily. Colin turned around and quietly gave Queen Elsa a thumbs up. Queen Elsa responded with a charming smile. Seeing that Marquis Garcia had no desire to talk and that his whole body exuded an aura of isolation and indifference, Colin did not dare disturb him too much, so he came to Queen Elsa and asked quietly, "You have decided on Alfalfa City, have you chosen the city lord?" Yes, Queen Elsa nodded, understanding that Colin remembered what Earl Evan said before leaving, so she explained, "He shouldn't be from the St. Zion family, the remnants." "Oh? Are you so sure?" Queen Elsa nodded and then reported a name that was somewhat familiar to Colin, Ron Rudd. A member of the Rudd family, Colin remembered. The half-elf queen before Elsa was from the Ludd family, and Duke Ludd was the commander of the Silver Moon Guards at the time. However, this man launched a coup under the instigation of Savoy, but of course, he was ruthlessly suppressed in the end. As a result, the Ludd family was deprived of their titles and fiefdoms by Queen Elsa and expelled from Silvermoon City. Yes, Queen Elsa explained, this Ron is the nephew of Duke Ludd, a third-level knight. He has some talents and is surrounded by a group of people from the Ludd family. So, I gave him this opportunity. And promised that as long as he can secure his position as the Lord of Alfalfa City, I will confer this place to the Ludd family and give them the corresponding titles. Colin nodded and agreed with Queen Elsa's decision. First of all, since Ron has a name and a traceable origin, he cannot be a remnant of the St. Zion family. Moreover, as a top half-elf family, Ron's abilities, connections, and prestige are all guaranteed, which is better than choosing a fugitive to be the city lord. Let him pay attention to anyone with suspicious origins. I know. After a brief explanation, Colin said no more. At the moment, he doesn't have time to play hide and seek with the possible remnant of the St. Zion family in Alfalfa City, and he doesn't even have time to care about the ownership of the city. The top priority is to return to the north as soon as possible and take Verad to Dragon City to meet Emperor Reinhardt and finalize the succession of the Duke of the North. Only then can he free up his hands to solve these messy problems. However, he did not pay attention to the remnants of the St. Zion family. After all, even Mr. Jin was dead, so what kind of trouble could the St. Zion family make? Moreover, Colin also doubted whether this remnant of the St. Zion family existed or whether it was a smoke bomb deliberately spread by Earl Evan. While thinking wildly, the flower boat has slowly docked. Before Marquis Garcia got off the boat, he saw the black cavalry on the shore kneeling on the ground in darkness. Knight Logue shouted at the top of his voice. Black Cavalry, welcome the return of the Marquis. Black Cavalry, welcome the return of the Marquis. The voices of nearly 10,000 black cavalry officers echoed along the Nashua River. A chilling atmosphere began to slowly gather. Colin silently looked at the scene in front of him with deep eyes. He had no doubt that, as long as Marquis Garcia gave the order, the black cavalry would immediately cross the river to avenge him. They don't even care whether the Northern Territory can sustain another war at this time or whether these 10,000 black cavalry troops can defeat the Eastern Territory. Where one person points, the whole army points. This is the prestige of Marquis Garcia in the black cavalry. Even though Colin has led this army to several great victories, and even though the Knights of Logue have led the black cavalry soldiers to swear allegiance to Colin under the orders of Marquis Garcia, they still cannot erase the words firmly engraved by Marquis Garcia. A mark on the soul of this army. At this time, Colin was inevitably a little worried about whether this black cavalry army would just leave him. Marquis Garcia's deep eyes slowly swept over the black cavalry soldiers on the shore. Wherever he went, every black cavalry soldier involuntarily straightened his chest and accepted the inspection of the person who believed in his heart. I don't know if they saw Marquis Garcia's full head of white hair and the crutch in his hand. The breathing of the black cavalry soldiers gradually became heavier, and there seemed to be flames beating in their eyes. The north wind whimpered, and the angry river surged like blood under the reflection of the setting sun. But just when this momentum reached its peak, Marquis Garcia suddenly said, "I am not qualified to be your commander-in-chief." Knight Logue was about to speak but was forced back by Marquis Garcia's cold gaze. It was me who trusted the wrong person, which led to the fiasco in Shadow Canyon. It was my unwillingness to keep my promise to live and die with the Black Cavalry. It was also my failure to understand the enemy's plot, which caused the northern border to fall into chaos. Life is ruined. I don't ask for your forgiveness, but I have no shame in leading you anymore. Marquis Garcia raised his finger, pointed at Colin, and said loudly, "You need a new commander." Colin's heart was filled with waves, and he turned his head. and saw Marquis Garcia's eyes as deep as water. There was guilt, relief, and ardent expectation in this look. Colin understood that Marquis Garcia was officially handing over the Black Cavalry to him. Although this was a scene he had dreamed of day and night when it came to pass, Colin was still moved and at the same time shocked by this heavy responsibility. Marquis Garcia smiled slightly, his tone full of encouragement. "From now on, the Black Cavalry will become history. Viscount Angelet, give this army of your own a new name." Colin, his thoughts turned quickly, knowing that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. If he missed this opportunity, he might not know how long it would take to truly conquer the strongest army in the north. "Let's call it the Blood Cavalry," Colin said loudly. "It originates from the Black Cavalry, is reborn from the blood, and will surely grow in the blood of the enemy." Marquis Garcia whispered the Blood Cavalry several times, with a look on his face. With a satisfied smile, he then slowly took a few steps back, highlighting Colin's position. Colin also said loudly and without hesitation, "The Blood Cavalry army obeys the order." Bang! Nightlogue's left hand hit the armor on his chest hard, and his eyes shifted from Marquis Garcia to Colin. Immediately afterward, a series of knocking sounds echoed through the sky, converging into a unified sound. The former Black Cavalry army officers finally truly accepted the change in their identities. Colin was excited and ordered, "Escort Marquis Garcia back to the north. Blood Cavalry army, take the order." Colin stood on the bow of the ship with his head held high, accepting the cheers of the Blood Cavalry army officers, and his heart was filled with incomparable joy. The heroic feeling. Behind him, Marquis Garcia stared at Colin's tall figure, and in a daze, he seemed to see himself 20 years ago. The two of them were walking in front of each other, one was high-spirited, and the other looked desolate. It seems to mark the end of an old era and the beginning of a new era. End of chapter. The Original Vampire. Author, Lugo Busroot. Chapter 289. The dense clouds covered the silver moon, only reflecting a dim halo in the sky. The weak moonlight could not even outline the shadows, and the dark Yulong city could only be decorated with sporadic firelight. The only exception was the northernmost point of Yulong city, where a strange golden light fell from the sky, opening up the dark night. That is the direction of the Holy Mountain, and it is also where the Holy Light Cathedral, the holy place of the Church of Glory, is located. This pillar of holy light, which lasts day and night, is like an eternal beacon, lighting up hope and direction for the lost people in the deep darkness. It's like this tonight and every night. Amidst the crisp sound of horse hooves, a four-wheel carriage pulled by 3 tall horses slowly drove towards the Holy Light Cathedral. The night guards not only did not stop the carriage but stood upright and formed a guard of honor to welcome the distinguished guests. Those who are qualified to ride a four-wheeled carriage to the top of the Holy Mountain must be distinguished. The center of the side wall of the carriage is painted with the pure world crimson flame pattern. Obviously, the visitor must be a core member of the imperial royal family. The carriage slowly stopped in front of the steps of the Holy Light Cathedral. A knight with a sword jumped down from the open-air seat behind the carriage. He ignored the church guards who came forward to inquire. He held a crystal lamp in one hand and placed the gold pedal in the carriage with the other. Door. Immediately, the door opened, and a tall, slender woman stepped out of the carriage. She was wearing a slightly plain prayer dress, but her beautiful appearance still made the church guards feel shuddered. They did not dare to look more, and they quickly bowed their heads and stood at attention. "Your Majesty the Queen." Queen Midla nodded slightly in greeting, then climbed up the steps and walked towards the church. The unique rhythm of her steps highlighted her peerless youthful temperament, which was reflected by the beam of holy light falling from the sky. Next, it brought with it a touch of holiness. The prayer hall of the church is extremely tall. Dozens of gray stone pillars support the 24-meter-high dome, giving people a feeling of insignificance. Coupled with the 4 huge statues of angels holding swords, it is even more awe-inspiring. The dome of the prayer hall is made of a special crystal. The holy light that lasts day and night passes through the dome, coating everything in the hall with a layer of gold, giving it a more sacred and solemn feel. Queen Midla stood in front of the statue of the Lord of Glory, clasping her hands together and praying silently. The faint sound of singing echoed in the prayer hall. It seemed that someone was singing hymns, and it seemed that it was an echo coming from heaven. A peaceful, yet soothing power fills the air. After an unknown amount of time, Queen Midla finished her prayer, raised her head, and looked at the holy light that seemed to lead to heaven, with a trace of ridicule on her face. "Are you really listening?" Midla asked in a mosquito-like voice. The holy light was still as dazzling as before, as if it had not changed in any way due to the Queen's disrespectful questioning. The sarcastic look on Queen Midra's face seemed to be getting stronger, perhaps, as he said, "You are already dead." Still no response. Queen Midla shook her head, seemingly losing her patience. She turned around slowly and saw an old priest with bald hair and no eyebrows standing behind her. I just don't know how long he stood there or whether he heard what the Queen just said. The purple clerical robe he wore indicated his noble status as the Pope. The priestly robes of the glorious church can be white, gray, or black. These colors can be worn by archbishops to ordinary priests, but there are two special colors they cannot wear, red and purple. The red cassocks are worn by the three cardinals, who are the three most senior members of the church besides the Pope. They are also called cardinals because of the color of their robes. The purple priest's robe can only be worn by the Pope himself. "Good evening, Your Majesty." Grigory. Queen Midla did not panic at all, as if she didn't care at all whether the Pope heard what she just said to herself. "Good evening, Your Highness the Queen." Pope Gregory had a kind face, and his smile had a natural affinity, as if all the suffering in the world could be alleviated in his smile. "Is Your Majesty's illness getting better?" Queen Midla sighed, a trace of worry appeared on her delicate face and shook her head. "Not yet. I woke up for a while this morning, but soon fell into sleep again." The smile on Li Jierui's face also faded, and he seemed very surprised. "Didn't Turnans improve His Majesty's condition?" Queen Midla looked sad. "Cardinal Turnans has not been found so far the cause of His Majesty's illness, so, I'm afraid it's a bit tricky." Pope Gregory sighed and comforted. "Then I will go to the Phoenix Palace in person tomorrow. The Lord of Glory will not give up on his pious shepherd. Please relax." Queen Midla quickly bowed her thanks and then left. Seeing the graceful figure of the Queen disappear from the entrance of the prayer hall, the Pope looked up at the holy light falling from the sky with a complicated expression in his eyes. Not long after, a waiter came quickly to Pope Gregory and reported softly, "Your Majesty, Archbishop Ajani, is back." Pope Gregory raised his brows, thought for a moment, and said, "Let her wait for me in the confessional at the bottom of the side hall." "Yes." Then, Pope Gregory came to stand in front of the statue of the Lord of Glory. He also clasped his hands and bowed his head in prayer. Perhaps he was praying for the man who suddenly fell seriously ill. The emperor prayed. After the prayer, Pope Gregory left the prayer hall, walked through the corridor, and followed the spiral staircase to the bottom of the cathedral. It faced a smooth stone wall with a huge oak door. Pope Gregory pushed the door open and entered. The interior was simply furnished, with only a table and two chairs. On the table was a copy of the Holy Book of Radiance and a row of silver candlesticks. In the soft candlelight, Ajani, who was dressed in a white robe, immediately stood up and bowed to the Pope. Grigori still had a compassionate smile on his face, but his words were not polite. "You disappoint me." Ajani's heart trembled, and she defended, "Your Majesty, what happened in the north has happened. There are too many, and I can't." "What do I want? An excuse," Gregory interrupted. Ajani immediately shut up, seeming to realize something, and asked softly in a slightly trembling tone, "Are you going to punish me?" "Anyone who makes mistakes should be punished." Upon hearing this, Ajani's breathing suddenly changed. He became anxious, and his watery peach blossom eyes were instantly filled with fear. But under Gregory's gaze, she turned around silently, knelt on the ground, folded her hands, closed her eyes, and waited for the coming punishment. At some point, Gregory had a long whip in his hand. The whip was covered with thorn-like protrusions, and he could even smell the strong smell of blood. Snapped. The long whip hit Ajani's back, leaving a bloody whip mark. A suppressed cry of pain came from Ajani's mouth, and her body shivered like a fragile flower in the storm. There was a smile of satisfaction on Gregory's face, but he did not stop cracking his whip. Bang bang bang. The long whip fell like a rainstorm, tearing the mage's robe on Ajani's back to pieces. Bloody whip marks continued to emerge, forming a shocking contrast with the flawless white skin, which actually had a sad and cruel beauty. Generally, the pastors of the Glory Church are not abstinent, and marrying a wife and having children does not prevent them from serving the Lord of Glory. However, if this priest has high aspirations and dreams of one day climbing to the top of the holy mountain and wearing the crown of thorns to become the Pope, then he must remain pure. The reason is very simple. Legend has it that the Church of Glory has an artifact that can communicate with the kingdom of heaven, the Golden Horn, which has been controlled by successive popes. But in order to sound the Golden Horn, the person must devote himself wholeheartedly to the Lord of Glory and must not be tainted with the affairs of men and women. Therefore, there are many ascetics in the Church, and this is certainly the case for Gregory, who can ascend to the position of Pope. Beauty and power, Gregory certainly knew which one to choose. After a long time, Gregory finally finished venting his anger. At this time, Ajani was lying limply on the ground, panting hard. Her entire back was covered with ferocious criss-crossing whip marks, dripping with blood, and terrible to look at. Gregory threw away the whip, took out a delicate vial, and dropped the holy water in the vial onto Ajani's back. Ajani's body couldn't help but tremble and twitch, and it was obvious that this process was not comfortable. God has mercy on the world, and the Lord heals all living beings. Gregory cast a healing spell on Ajani, and a compassionate smile appeared on his face again. In an instant, he returned to the sanctimonious Pope. It has to be said that the healing technique performed by the Pope himself is indeed powerful. When combined with the holy water, the scars on Ajani's back healed at a speed visible to the naked eye and disappeared in a short time. Ajani finally recovered and slowly sat up from the ground. Her mage robe had long been torn from the whipping just now, and now it completely slipped off, revealing her infinitely beautiful upper body. Ajani didn't even cover it up, and she didn't know whether it was because she didn't dare or she was deliberately irritating the man in front of her. Grigory looked away like an electric shock, as if he were afraid that if he looked at him a few more times, he would lose control and destroy the results of most of his life's hard work. Ajani seemed to have seen this scene, lowering her head, but the corners of her mouth were slightly raised as if she were disdainful, but she also seemed to be happy about her successful revenge. Grigory coughed a few times and ordered, "Vera Saint Hilda will arrive at Yulong City soon. At this time, the dragons in the north are leaderless. You should rush back to Winter City immediately to see if you can take advantage of the opportunity, win over some lords." "Yes," Ajani responded obediently. Gregory took one last greedy look at Ajani's exquisite curves, then he made up his mind, turned around, opened the door and walked out. Silence returned to the confessional again. Ajani stood stunned for a long time, then picked up the bloody whip from the ground and looked at it carefully, as if she wanted to see some mystery in it. After a moment, she put the whip against her chest, letting the blood on it wet her tender skin again. Her hand slowly tightened, and the barb on the whip immediately dug into her chest, and blood seeped out again. Ajani snorted softly, feeling a little pained. But then, her frown slowly relaxed. Raising her head, Ajani's deep gaze seemed to have passed through all the obstacles and followed the holy light up to the sky. The omnipotent Lord of Glory, the lost lamb needs guidance. Please listen to her confession. End of this chapter. The Original Vampire. Author, Lugo Busroot. Chapter 290. Do you think there are still giant dragons in this world? Colin suddenly asked with a smile while looking at the tall and majestic walls of Yulong City. Vera was riding a horse with him. She huddled in her husband's warm embrace and replied in a lazy tone, "The dragon is already extinct, of course there won't be any." Colin seemed a little unwilling to give up and spoke harshly. She said, "Perhaps there are some surviving dragons hiding in some dark corner." Vera pursed her lips and smiled, explaining, "It is possible, but it is unlikely according to records. When the High Elves were created, he created a wonderful spell called Looking for Dragons, which can locate the approximate area where giant dragons are in the world. Therefore, if there are still giant dragons in the world, the High Elves will definitely know about it. However, the conclusion that the giant dragons are extinct is that the High Elves ordered it. I think they said that because they were confident." Colin nodded and understood, but then he sighed with regret, "That's such a pity, I still want to see the giant." "What about the dragon style?" Bachelor Dawn on the side interjected, "The dragon should be extinct, but there is still a dragon egg in the Phoenix Palace. If the Viscount is interested, you can go and visit it." "Oh. Dragon egg? Didn't it hatch?" Colin was indeed interested. "Of course not." Bachelor Dawn shook his head. The San Lorenzo family also tried various methods, but the dragon egg still didn't show any vitality. Seeing Colin's longing face, Vera smiled and said, "Colin, if you are interested in dragons, you can go to Seville. The Mages' Council still preserves the remains of several dragons. However, most of the dragon remains are in the hands of the elves. If we hadn't become a forbidden area, you could feast your eyes on it." "It's a forbidden area now, but it may not be in the future," Colin said enthusiastically. "Yes, in fact, the mages have been trying to find a way to enter Huia Forest." During the heated discussion between the three people, Yulong City was already in front of them. The welcoming team had already lined up neatly as a guard of honor outside the city gate, and the beautiful figure at the head was none other than Queen Midla. "Aunt." Vera quickly jumped off the horse, walked a few steps quickly, and hugged Queen Midla cordially. Midra gently stroked Vera's back and comforted her, "I've also heard about your father. I'm really sorry." Vera nodded lightly and said nothing more. Her feelings for Duke St. Hilda were extremely complicated, and she didn't know how to express them at the moment. "Your Highness the Queen," Kaylin also quickly stepped forward to salute. Queen Midla smiled brightly and said, "Kellen, I'm sorry that I couldn't attend your wedding, but I'm also very happy that Vera has such an outstanding knight guarding you. It's me who can gain your approval. It's an honor. From now on, I will work harder and never let you down." Colin remained polite on the surface, but in his heart, he kept away from this beautiful queen. What the other party did in Silver Moon City had already let Colin know that this woman was by no means an easygoing person. When he came to Yulong City this time, his plan was to have Vera accept the canonization as soon as possible and then immediately go back to officially take over the Northern Territory. Only by redeveloping the North can Colin truly gain a foothold in this world. Under the leadership of Queen Midla, Colin and his party entered Yulong City. As the largest city in the glorious empire and even in this world, Yulong City is indeed much more prosperous than Winter City. The spacious streets were filled with pedestrians coming and going, but after seeing the royal flag, they all moved to the side of the road and curiously observed who was entering the city. In order to avoid causing unnecessary commotion, Colin and Vera both got into the Queen's carriage, so outsiders could not see them. But some smart people recognized the team of the St. Hilda family from the Golden Lion badge and knew that the successor of the Duke of the North should be the one to accept the Emperor's canonization. All the way to the Phoenix Palace, Colin jumped out of the carriage first and then very gentlemanly helped Vera and Queen Midla out of the carriage. The waiting palace maids took out colorful petals from the flower baskets and sprinkled them into the air, and soon the road to the Phoenix Palace was covered. Vera took Colin's arm, stepped onto the steps covered with flowers, and walked towards the magnificent Phoenix Palace. Colin originally thought that Emperor Reinhard would greet him in the palace, but unexpectedly, he did not see the Emperor. This made him wonder, was the Emperor really too busy, or did he have a problem with Vera? According to Bachelor Dawn's judgment, Emperor Reinhard should want to see Vera inherit the position of Duke of the North, but now it seems that something is wrong. With a hint of gloom in his heart, Colin didn't even pay much attention to admiring the magnificent Phoenix Palace. Queen Midla led Colin and Vera into the reception hall of the side hall. The decoration style of the hall is not particularly luxurious, but if you look closely, you will find the low-key elegance hidden in the subtleties. Exquisite and unique murals and sculptures decorate the corners of the hall. The ground is paved with century-old Paulownia wood floors that are as bright as mirrors. 7 crystal magic lamps are hung from the ceiling. Even during the day, they still emit soft light. The 3 of them were seated separately, and several beautiful palace maids came in with silver trays and served drinks and desserts. Out of politeness, Vera tasted the murals on the wall. At this time, Colin wisely kept his mouth shut. The artistic accomplishment of the former son of a country baron was really limited, so he had better not bring trouble to himself. Fortunately, Queen Midla was also a member of the St. Hilda family, so the atmosphere quickly became casual and cordial. However, Colin was a little absent-minded. He was wondering when Emperor Reinhard would show up. However, they never waited for the ruler of the empire. Instead, they waited for the Queen's son and daughter. Harrison Prince Colin had already met him in Silvermoon City. Perhaps Colin had left too deep an impression on him, but now he was still a little scared when he saw Colin again, and his eyes were obviously a little bit awkward when he saluted and greeted him. Dodge. As for Princess Judy, this was Colin's first time meeting her. She is slightly younger than Prince Harrison. She is wearing a cute floral pleated skirt, a pair of ponytails, and silver crystal shoes on her feet. She looks exactly like Queen Midla. She is a beauty, but she still has some babies on her face. Fat, but even more lovable. Moreover, she seems to know how to give full play to her own advantage. She was called Sister Vera and Brother Colin sweetly when they met. Vera was quickly smitten and held Judy in her arms, unable to let go. The atmosphere in the hall suddenly became warmer, and the topic turned to the fun things of the 2 children. Vera and Colin's trip to the imperial capital seemed like a trip to visit relatives. But until the end of the meeting, Queen Midla did not mention the canonization of the Duke, let alone when Emperor Reinhard would receive Vera. If the other party didn't mention it, Colin wouldn't dare to ask. When Queen Midla got up and sent Vera and Colin to rest, Prince Harrison and Princess Judy were the only ones left in the living room. Judy was still eating the remaining dessert with relish, but Harrison was looking at the ground blankly, wondering what he was thinking. "Brother, don't you want to eat?" Judy asked kindly. Harrison shook his head, a little distracted. "There's nothing scary about Viscount Angelet. When did I say I was afraid of him?" Harrison was like a kitten whose tail was stepped on, and his fur suddenly exploded. Judy swept away her naive look before, revealing her true face as an eccentric person, and said with a smile, "Do you want me to help you get revenge?" Harrison seemed a little moved but said stubbornly, "I have no grudge against him." "Really? That's who is having nightmares at night, screaming his name, and wetting the bed." "Koo-koo-koo-koo-koo." Seeing his sister laughing at him, Harrison's face turned red with anger, and he jumped out of the chair. He jumped up and walked out without looking back. "Hey, Brother Harrison, wait for me." End of chapter. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Original Vampire. Author, Lugo Busroot. Chapter 291. Just when Vera and Colin were taken into the Phoenix Palace by Queen Midla, Bachelor Dawn came to the southern area of Yulong City alone. Since the Holy Mountain and the Phoenix Palace are both located in the North District of Yulong City, nobles with some status will try their best to settle down and buy property in the North District. The South District has naturally become a gathering place for common people. The further south you go, the darker and simpler the buildings become. But in such a civilian gathering area, there is a manor that is incompatible with the surrounding environment. Although this manor is not in a good location, it occupies a large area. It is surrounded by fruit trees with buds. There are several unique villas within the walls, and they are all equipped with bungalows, barracks, warehouses, and gardens. It is completely like a noble house. Manor. In Yulong City, the only person who is willing to build such a manor in a civilian area is the Prime Minister, Baron Heidegger. This imperial Prime Minister, who was born as a commoner, always had a certain distance from nobles, which he could not change even after he had been in a high position for more than 40 years. Perhaps it is precisely because he was born at the bottom, cares about the bottom, and knows what the people at the bottom are thinking that he can manage the empire to prosper. Of course, perhaps this is also the reason why the Imperial Senate has always looked down upon this bumpkin. After confirming his identity, Bachelor Dawn was led into the manor by the butler. But the housekeeper did not take Bachelor Dawn to the study or the living room. Instead, he guided him to a lawn behind the main castle. There, Maester Dawn saw the Imperial Prime Minister, who was squatting on the ground and roasting sweet potatoes without any image. Baron Heidegger is over 70 years old. He has gray hair, but he is still in good spirits. He is dressed in slightly old but quite neat casual clothes. He looks like an ordinary old civilian and does not have the aura of a boss at the helm of the imperial administration. Field. Your Majesty Prime Minister, Bachelor Daon quickened his pace, stepped forward, and bowed. Baron Heidegger was obviously very familiar with Bachelor Dawn. After seeing him, he pointed to the ground with a smile and said casually, "Sit down and try my roasted sweet potatoes." Okay, Bachelor Daon didn't feel very comfortable either. Being ignored, he sat down on the lawn and then took the sweet potato from the Baron with a smile. It might have been a little hot to his hands, so he blew on it hurriedly and shook it back and forth in his hand. Baron Heidegger's eyes have lost their proper brilliance due to long years of hard work and appear grey and dull, but everyone who is stared at by these grey eyes will feel uncomfortable, as if the other person has the ability to see everything, making everyone the filth and filthiness inside cannot be hidden. Bachelor Dawn maintained a leisurely and contented manner under such gazes. He carefully peeled off the sweet potato skin in his hand and ate it with relish. Seeing the other party enjoying himself, Baron Heidegger also had a smile on his face and asked, "Is there any problem with the food supply in the north this year?" Viscount Angelet has received strong support from the half-elf kingdom. Should be able to survive this year, but the lives of ordinary people will be a little difficult. At this point, Bachelor Dawn raised his head, looked at Baron Heidegger with hopeful eyes, and asked, "If the central government of the empire can support some food, then the situation in the north will be much better." Baron Heidegger shook his head and refused, "It's not that I don't want to help you, I'm afraid the Fijian leader will have some problems with its own food supply this year." "What's wrong?" said Academician N, who was quite puzzled. "There haven't been any disasters in the Scarlet Flame territory in recent years, right?" Baron Heidegger's face became a little solemn. "The situation in the western region is a bit bad. The St. family has written several times to request the Empire the central government sent troops to support us. However, neither His Majesty nor the Senate agreed to send troops, but only agreed to provide food and material support." Bachelor Dawn also frowned and asked, "Is the pressure from the orcs so great?" "Yes. According to a letter from the St. family, an orc force called the Warsong tribe is rising at an extremely terrifying speed. The Western Territory had to send an expeditionary force across the Tianduan Mountains to intervene militarily to prevent the Warsong tribe from taking advantage of the situation. Make it bigger, and even unify the orcs and establish the Third Orc Empire. The Third Orc Empire, Bachelor Dawn was horrified. The glorious empire established by the human race occupies the richest area in the center of the continent, but there will inevitably be coveted alien races around. Except for dwarves, goblins, and half-elves, who are weak and can only rely on the glorious empire, there are only 4 alien races that can really pose a threat to humans: the trolls in the north, the elves in the east, and the naga in the south. And the orcs of the west. The elves have long since disappeared in the Moon Forest, so the eastern border of the empire is actually the most stable now. Nagas are an amphibious race. Being away from water sources for a long time will make their skin dehydrated and cracked. Therefore, their harm to the southern border is limited to daily plunder. At most, they occupy some coastal beach areas, and the threat is not great. The trolls in the north were once a great threat, but under the strong suppression of the northern border, they can no longer make any waves. Now they only dare to hide far away in the northern part of the sky ice field to survive. Only the orcs in the west have always been a serious problem for the glorious empire. If the other 3 major alien races do not have an absolute advantage in force compared to humans, then the orcs are different. An ordinary orc soldier basically requires 3 or 4 human soldiers to deal with it. As for professionals, orcs believe in the god of destruction, and their god's favored profession is skull crusher. Their strength is far superior to that of human knights of the same level, and they are completely invincible at the same level. Fortunately, although the orcs are superb in terms of force, they are very weak in intelligence. Therefore, the development of the orc civilization can be said to be at the bottom of the 5 major races. It is still a loose tribal form, fighting with each other, and it is difficult to form a joint force. But there are exceptions to everything. In the history of the orcs, there have been many heroes with outstanding talents. Thanks to their efforts, the orcs have had 2 brief periods of unification. Also known as the First Empire of Orcs and the Second Empire of Orcs. Once the orcs were unified, the orc army formed, which was definitely the most terrifying existence on this continent. After the last orc Second Empire was established, the orc army marched straight in, and it took only 3 months to penetrate the Western Territory and annihilate Fey. The main army of the Flame Leader surrounded Yulong City. If Yulong City had not been able to be attacked for a long time and the contradictions within the Second Orc Empire that had been forcibly suppressed gradually became apparent, causing the human race to seize the opportunity and design the Second Orc Empire to fall apart, I am afraid that the master of this continent would have to change to another race. But after that, the Radiant Empire had been wary of the orcs, fearing that the orcs would reunify and even establish the Third Reich. Therefore, this time, the Warsong tribe has risen strongly and has a tendency to unify the orcs. The western region immediately sent an expeditionary force across the Tianduan Mountains in an attempt to intervene with force to nip the danger in the bud. Bachelor Daon also understood the importance of and stopped mentioning the matter of borrowing food. Instead, he asked, what is the current situation of the expeditionary force sent by the western region? The St. Gerian family sent the expeditionary force in October last year. So far, no clear good news has come back, so it is difficult for me to judge what the situation is like in the west of the Tianduan mountain range. Then, the 2 fell silent at the same time, obviously worried. After a while, Bachelor Dawn spoke again, since St. Gerian has repeatedly requested support from the central government of the empire, why has His Majesty never agreed? Baron Heidegger smiled faintly and said, since the fall of the Second Orc Empire until now, in more than 1,000 years, the Western Territory has submitted hundreds of requests for assistance to the Empire's Central Committee each time they said which tribe was rising strongly and there were signs of unifying the orcs. Of course, the Empire's Central Committee attached great importance to it at the beginning, and almost every city sent troops to support each time, but it was gradually discovered that the St. Grian family was just exaggerating and wanted the Empire Center to help them clean up the border troubles. Later, unless the threat of the orcs was confirmed, the Empire Center would not easily send troops to the Western Territory again. Bachelor Don was also a little helpless. It turned out that the Central Empire was also afraid of the Western Territory's free prostitutes. Baron Heidegger glanced at Bachelor Don and then said, moreover, at that time, the chaos in the north had become apparent, and His Majesty might have wanted to intervene, but later, for some reason, he also left it alone. Bachelor Don's eyes flickered, and he thought to himself, does the Minim family sending troops to the north count as meddling? Now that the northern border has been pacified but no good news has come back from the expeditionary force in the western border, Your Majesty should also make plans to send troops to support the St. Gerian family. No, Baron Heidegger shook his head, and his eyes became more worried. Why? Bachelor Don was confused. Regarding the matter of the unification of the orcs, he would rather believe it or not. He didn't understand why His Majesty the Emperor was so dismissive. Baron Heidegger narrowed his eyes and said in a deep voice. Because, someone wants to start another war. End of this chapter. The Original Vampire. Author, Lugo Busrud. Chapter 292. Another war. Bachelor Don exclaimed in surprise. Baron Heidegger nodded expressionlessly and explained, Prince Lehigh wants to declare war on the Council of Mages and send troops to attack Jewel. Bachelor Don remained silent. He could also understand Prince Leahy's motivation for doing this. The emergence of the forbidden curse Eye of Judgment made all the Imperial Knights have trouble sleeping and eating, especially the Paladin Prince Lehigh. He has already killed Mr. Jin with his own hands, but now it seems that he wants to completely eliminate the roots and destroy the Mages Council. Jewel will not be captured without mercy. Hasn't Prince Lehigh thought about the consequences of doing this? Isn't he worried that those mages will risk their lives and die together? Baron Heidegger sighed and said, you didn't do anything, you have dealt with Prince Leahy, so you don't understand him. This is not a person who can be coerced. Emperor Reinhardt secretly reached an agreement with Mr. Jin, thinking that he could use the power of the mage to balance Prince Leahy. Haha, what a pity. He doesn't understand either. No, maybe he understands, but he doesn't want to believe it. If someone holds a sword on Prince Leahy's neck, his first reaction will never be to compromise but to draw the sword and stab him. His neck was also pierced by the opponent. This is the pride of the Paladin. Bachelor Don was suddenly speechless. Indeed, if Prince Lehigh had been coerced by this method, it would have been impossible for him to brave all the obstacles and enter the Holy Land in the first place. Therefore, after learning that Mr. Jin had used a forbidden spell to kill Duke St. Hilda, Prince Lehigh immediately went to the north in person and decisively killed Mr. Jin without worrying about whether such an action would attract the mage's revenge. Even now, he wants to completely eradicate the Mage Council. Perhaps, he is already prepared to become the next target of the forbidden curse of the Eye of Judgment. The mages claimed that they would die together, but why would the paladins not give up? Bachelor Don's heart was heavy, and he asked again, has Prince Leahy's proposal been discussed at the Royal Council? What is the result? What is the opinion of the Senate? Baron Heidegger shook his head and said, now the imperial meeting has not yet been held, so the attitudes of all parties are still unclear. When will the imperial meeting be held? Could this proposal have just been put forward? No, after Prince Leahy returned from the north half a month ago, this proposal to declare war has been put forward, but it has never been discussed at the Imperial Council. Why? Because, Baron Heidegger frowned. Because His Majesty has never attended the Imperial Council, such an important issue is impossible. Let me moderate the discussion. Bachelor Don also frowned. He had heard before that Emperor Reinhard did not take care of much, leaving military affairs to Prince Lehigh, government affairs to Baron Heidegger, and diplomacy to Queen Midla. In short, he himself was either addicted to pursuit or busy cuckolding the nobles of the imperial capital. But Bachelor Dawn never thought that now he would declare war on the mages, and it was ridiculous that Emperor Reinhard still did not attend the imperial meeting. Immediately, Bachelor Dawn realized that perhaps Emperor Reinhard did not attend the imperial meeting on purpose. Because he definitely doesn't want to declare war on the mage and even hopes to rely on the mage to check and balance Prince Lehigh. Therefore, in the face of Prince Lehigh's domineering behavior of directly flipping the table, Emperor Reinhard chose to hide. Is this just going to keep dragging on? Bachelor Dawn felt that Emperor Reinhard's choice was unwise. Baron Heidegger pulled a sarcastic smile from the corner of his mouth and said, "How could Prince Leahy let this proposal drag on forever? If you want to send out the Imperial Central Army, there is another way besides His Majesty's order." Senate, Bachelor Daon reacted immediately. But then, his frown deepened. The establishment of the Senate was actually to limit the power of the king. If you encounter an extremely absurd emperor, there must be an institution that can check and balance his behavior. The Glorious Charter stipulates that as long as the Senate can pass a resolution with an absolute majority, more than 2/3, of the votes, the resolution can take effect directly without the consent of the emperor. Therefore, as long as Prince Lehigh can obtain more than 2/3 of the support in the Senate, he can directly bypass Emperor Reinhard and launch a war against Jewel. But Maester Dawn also realized that if Prince Lehigh really did this, he would completely break up with Emperor Reinhard. Will the Senate support Prince Leahy on this matter? Bachelor Dawn's tone was a little heavy. Baron Heidegger shrugged and put on a helpless expression. "You are asking the wrong person. I can't find out the true attitude of the elders in the Senate." Bachelor Deo. Realizing that I was confused, I asked a stupid question. However, thinking of the conflict between Baron Heidegger and the Senate, Bachelor Dawn remembered the real purpose of his visit this time. "Prime Minister, actually I came to you this time because I hope you can stand up and support Master Joyce to succeed the Duke of the North at the right time." Baron Heidegger was stunned. He was about to say that he was the Duke of the North. He had no say in the issue of inheritance, but soon he understood the true purpose of Maester Dawn. "Haha, you want to use me to influence the resolution of the Senate, right? It's a smart idea. Well, okay, I will find a suitable opportunity to help." At this point, Baron Heidegger suddenly stopped. "It seems that a certain key has been thought of." "Your Majesty Prime Minister," Bachelor Daon called out twice in confusion. "Haha, your idea has given me a lot of inspiration." Baron Heidegger came back to his senses, his face full of excitement. "I already thought that if Prince Leahy wanted to pass the Senate, if I come to declare war on the mage, I won't be able to exert any influence. After all, you know that I and the Senate are really incompatible. But now, you have given me a new idea. Maybe, I can really use it. Such a way to influence the Senate's decision." Bachelor Dawn's eyes flashed, and he understood what Baron Heidegger meant, so he asked carefully, "So, do you support Prince Leahy's declaration of war on the mage, or do you oppose it?" "Objection," Baron Heidegger said without hesitation. "Now is not the best time to deal with Jewel." Bachelor Dawn nodded in agreement. He also did not think that he should provoke Jewel at this time. The Northern Territory has just stabilized, and trouble seems to be happening in the Western Territory. It is not a wise move for the Empire to provoke the Mage Council at this time. What's more, Vera is also a mage, and Bachelor Dawn is also worried that this trend of exterminating magic will affect the succession of the Duke of the North. Immediately, Bachelor Dawn thought of another question. "Oh, by the way, if Emperor Reinhard has been unwilling to attend the Imperial meeting, then he probably won't receive Miss Vera, right?" Baron Heidegger shook his head and said, "Probably not. I heard some rumors that His Majesty was ill, and His Majesty the Pope was invited to treat him. I just don't know if this is true or just an excuse to delay." Bachelor Daon thought in his mind heavy. He began to feel that he, Vera, and her group might have to wait in Yulong City for a long time. At least until the outcome of the game between Prince Leahy and Emperor Reinhardt came to an end. This is an extremely dangerous political whirlpool. If he was accidentally involved, Bachelor Daon would have a headache. Baron Heidegger seemed to see the worry of Bachelor Dawn, and asked, "What, are you worried that if you stay in Yulong City for too long, there will be chaos in the north?" "There should be no chaos in the north. Marquis Garcia is here. Winter City is in charge." "That's good." Baron Heidegger looked into Maester Dawn's eyes and said seriously, "However, I want to remind you that it is best not to rush to arrange way before the outcome of this battle. Take me to see His Majesty." "Why?" Baron Heidegger did not answer directly, but said slowly, "What kind of person is easiest to escape from the vortex?" Bachelor Dawn thought for a while, and then suddenly said, "No, the one who bears the burden." Baron Heidegger smiled happily and said no more, just peeling the sweet potatoes meticulously. His expression was so serious that he seemed to be carefully carving a handicraft. "Did you know? The yield of sweet potatoes is much higher than that of wheat. I have always wanted to promote sweet potatoes as a staple food that can replace wheat, but I can't get enough recognition." Bachelor Dawn smiled and said, "Because everyone can't bear not having it the days of bread." Baron Heidegger snorted and said leisurely, "Perhaps it won't be long before they are no longer qualified to be so picky about food." Bachelor Dawn nodded thoughtfully and saw Baron Heidegger eating a big meal. Popping the sweet potatoes, he couldn't help but wonder, "Your Excellency Prime Minister, Queen Mitra will host a banquet for Miss Vera and Viscount Angelet at the Phoenix Palace tonight. Aren't you going to attend?" Baron Heidegger shook his head, "No, noble, the food at the banquet made me feel nauseous, but crude food like sweet potato suits my taste." Bachelor Daon smiled faintly and stopped trying to persuade him. Then he picked up another roasted sweet potato from the barbecue grill and blew on it. Angry, he peeled it off. Seeing this, Baron Heidegger asked, "What, aren't you going to?" Bachelor Dawn took a bite of the fragrant sweet potato and said with a smile, "No, I think your dinner party is more attractive." Baron Heidegger burst out laughing and said with a proud look on his face, "You are the second person in the entire glorious empire who can have this taste." "Oh," Bachelor Dawn asked curiously, "then I am very curious, what else, who is this?" Baron Heidegger smiled faintly and said a name, Turnans. Bachelor Dawn was shocked. He knew that this was the name of a cardinal of the Glory Church, and he was also the first among the 3 cardinals in the line of succession. End of chapter.